I was noticing when the children were leaving after Julie's story how Colby was the last one to leave, and he was skipping off the stage. And I thought, what a great sign for children, just enjoying church, feeling like they can just skip, that it's a happy place for them, and we're grateful. Please pray with me, please. God of grace and God of hope, speak into our lives. Speak to us of the promise that comes in being your children, so that we might skip with absolute delight in knowing that you have come into our lives, that your hope has illuminated the darkness. Grace us with a deep sense of your presence. For we know that whatever life brings to us, that the one constant in an ever-changing world is your presence and your love. And may God's people say, you ever think that you have life all figured out? You know, you get out of bed, you have some appointments, you turn the key to the car, the battery's dead. Or like Shannon, you go to the store, you collect all of your Christmas gifts, some of those hard-to-find toys for your niece and nephew, and you have it in the basket, only a couple of them left on the shelf, and you turn for just a moment, and you turn back, and someone has taken your shopping cart just a few days before Christmas. We think we have life all figured out, and the unexpected comes. That's what Christmas is all about. God speaking into the lives of two unlikely people. Mary, this unsophisticated young woman from a backwater town, and Joseph, a carpenter, that God chooses to speak into their lives. And if God could choose to speak into lives like theirs, then why not unlikely lives like yours and mine? In Luke's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 28, an angel went to Mary and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." And Mary's thinking, highly favored? Why me? What's so special about me? And it says that Mary was greatly troubled. And now you will conceive in your womb, the messenger from God says, and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And Mary says in response, how can that be? This is impossible. This is improbable. Someone like me carrying God's own child. A reoccurring theme is that God chooses the unlikely one in unlikely circumstances to bring about that which is life-giving. And do we believe that to be true? Do we believe that as God spoke into the story of Mary and Joseph, that God speaks into your story too? Anyone here listen to National Public Radio StoryCorps? Anyone ever listen to StoryCorps? It's on every Friday morning, or you can go online and listen to people's stories. There are labs that are on mobile labs that cross the country, at malls, at large gatherings, and people can go and record their story up to about 5 minutes, some aspect of their story. And they're all archived in the Library of Congress. And to date, over 120,000 stories of average Americans have been recorded. The idea is that everyone has a story to tell, and that there are lessons to be found, profound lessons to be found in your life and in my life. Stories such as Joe Ditmore. Joe was an insurance mid-level executive, and on September 11th, 2001, he was on the 105th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And he heard a giant explosion. And he looked across at the North Tower, and he saw a fire coming from the top of the tower. A plane had crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And 20 minutes later, another plane would crash into the tower where Joe was on the 105th floor. And Joe, with others, was able to escape the South Tower before it collapsed. And he tells a story in the StoryCorps lab about that day, of how he made his way to Penn Station, and he got on the train. And for the hour and a half it took to get from Penn Station to Philadelphia, the train was packed. It was standing room only. And he said no one spoke for an hour and a half. People were dazed. They were in shock. Their whole world had changed. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew that something terrible had occurred and that lives had been lost. And here was Joe Ditmar, this mid-level insurance agent from Illinois, getting a rental car in Philadelphia. He said normally it takes 14 hours to drive from Philadelphia to get to his home. He said that day I drove it in 11 and a half hours. He said, I just wanted to be back with my wife. I wanted to hold my children because I knew how precious life was. And he said, like every 30 minutes, I would call my wife and I'd say, I'm only a couple of hours away. I'm only so many miles away. I'll be with you soon. And then his wife responded. She said, well, there's a worship service that's going to be happening about the time you're expected to arrive. It's at our church, Our Lady of Mercy. And he said, I'll meet you there. Just like churches across the country had gathered in the aftermath of the terrorist attack on September 11th, they gathered to provide comfort and meaning. And he drove into that church parking lot on a Thursday afternoon. And he said it was like Christmas. Cars were parked up and down the street. The parking lot was full. And he walked up the stairs in the exterior of the church, Our Lady of Mercy, and there was his son, Josh, waiting for him, knowing that his dad would be coming. The church service had already started. His 11-year-old boy raced into the church, and he said, Mom, he's here. The preacher stopped, and everyone turned. And he said, as he walked into that church, holding his boy's hand, there were several hundred eyes looking at him. And he said, at that moment, more than any moment in my life, I knew I was home. I knew I was safe. I knew, surrounded by the love and the prayers not only of my family, but of friends and of strangers, I knew there was a place of belonging for me. That's Joe Ditmar's story. Each one of us has a story to tell that has great wisdom and great meaning. And on that first Christmas, God chose to speak into an unlikely life like Mary's and Joseph's, to speak the unlikely news that God was with them and God was working through them. Do we believe that to be true? In this morning's play, Mary says, Joseph, I feel strongly as though God is already with us, with you and me, I mean, that everything is going to be all right, not just for us, but for everyone. What do you think? Look at your own life. Do you and I believe that God is already with us, right here, right now? Some of us are dealing with some really hard things in our life. Do we believe that God is in our very midst? Mary said to the angel, how can this be? I'm just a virgin. I'm just a girl from a backwater town. And the angel said to her, the Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born is to be holy and will be called the Son of God. And she said, to top it off, now Elizabeth, your cousin, in her old age, is also about to conceive a son, who we will know as John the Baptist. For nothing is impossible with God. Says the angel to Mary. Says the angel to old Elizabeth. Nothing is impossible for God. And Mary said, here I am, the servant of the Lord. Here I am, the servant of the Lord. The theologian Ashley Clare offers this: the stories in the Bible, particularly this story of Mary and Joseph, invites us to believe that our lives are not initiated solely by human effort and intention. It's not just you and me living our lives, making our decisions, making our choices, but it's the belief that God chooses to intervene into unlikely lives, unusual lives, regular lives like ours. That there's more going on than meets the eye, more going on than we can fully understand, comprehend, measure, or quantify. Each of us has a story to tell. A few years ago, I had the privilege to walk alongside a family with a loved one who was at Kaplan House, drawing towards the close of her life. Her name was Sandy, and she was dying of an illness. She was the same age as me. And this relatively young woman, her life was drawing to a close, and she knew it. But she created space intentionally for her family and her friends over the course of a number of weeks to gather around her, to share their stories of being with one another, to share mundane stories of concerts and Christmases and holidays and vacations, some hard stuff of where they had to forgive each other and let go of some old wounds and resentments. Sandy created that space for people to come together to tell their story. And as the family walked with Sandy through this time, there was what the Celtics call the thin place, which emerged. The belief that there is a permeable membrane that separates our conscious world, our world of lists and to-dos and plans and schemes, and that there are times when we pass through that permeable membrane to a place where we sense that there is something more going on than meets the eye. That which we call the presence of the sacred, the holy, the divine. That which cannot be measured or quantified, but you know it when you feel it. You sense that you are in the midst of love. Perhaps you felt that when you held a child for the first time, and your heart just opens up in ways you thought impossible. Perhaps you have felt that when you're with a loved one coming towards the end of their life. That thin place, when we recognize that the holy is with us in an ordinary story like yours and an ordinary story like mine. Mary said, "How can this be?" Joseph said, "How can this be?" The writer Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time and a host of other wonderful books for children and those who are young at heart, she said, "Advent is a season pregnant with promise." Advent is our season every year, pregnant with promise, full of blessing and hope and healing, each according to our need. And the question is, do we believe that to be true? What promises do you sense being stirred within you this Advent season? What do you long for? What brokenness do you carry that you want to experience healing from? Where do you want to be freed? What hope do you need? The great news of Christmas each year is that God chooses, for some incredible reason that we can't fully comprehend, that God chooses to break through an ordinary story like yours and mine, and always to bring about that which is life-giving. This is the good news. Thanks be to God. And may God's people say, amen.